Yeah, Brandon, that big news with Gary Kubiak stepping down, how much of a surprise was that to people there in Denver?
Well, there were rumblings last week, and that's because nothing private can really stay private anymore, I guess. And on Friday, Gary Kubiak was asked about his future, and maybe it started to come up a little bit because there seemed to be a noticeable disconnect between Gary and John, at least maybe not overly noticeable, but people were aware of it. And there was the thought that several of these offensive coaches may be out of work, and everyone knows how loyal Gary Kubiak is. So it just kind of threw it all out there between the health stuff. So when he was asked about his future, he was very non-committal. He said, "Oh, this week's about the Raiders. We'll address that later." And then all of a sudden, flashing lights go off, and we're like, "Wait a second. Okay, that's not. No, I want to be here. Yes, I'll be here." And then on top of that, Wade Phillips' future was up in the air as well because his contract was expiring. So it certainly opened the door. But actually, Sunday morning, when I saw the news first reported by Adam Schefter on ESPN, who's pretty tied into John Elway and the Broncos, and I think it broke around 6 a.m. local, 8 a.m. Eastern, a couple hours before Adam's show hits the air on the NFL pregame that they do on ESPN. So it was definitely a weird day to cover a game that doesn't matter, which hasn't happened around here for 5 years, and then to know that Gary Kubiak was on his way out and the Raiders are playing for the division and a bye, and so it's just a very weird day. And you never saw Paxton Lynch go into the game like we thought we would. So one of the weirdest, if not the weirdest, game day that I can remember.
So let's back up a little bit here, Brandon. What can you tell us about this possible deterioration in the relationship between Elway and Kubiak, former teammates there with the Broncos?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as frayed as John's relationship with John Fox was. And Elway can be really demanding and not overly controlling, but probably more than a lot of GMs because most GMs didn't win a couple Super Bowls and don't have gold jackets in their closet. He has thoughts on how the game should be played and who should be involved in various aspects. And I know that it was an issue with John Fox that John would at times want to exert his influence. I mean, Fox's final year, John had a meeting with the team where he addressed the team. John Elway did 3 different times. And a GM just doesn't do that normally. And so while Gary was probably the best coach to work with John because his entire life, starting when they were rookies together, when Elway gets traded from the Colts to the Broncos, and Gary Kubiak knows that he all of a sudden doesn't have a shot to start because he sees how John Elway throws the ball. And I think he called his dad the first day of OTAs and minicamp and said, "Dad, I don't think I'm going to be the starting quarterback for the Broncos." So he's been used to deferring to John Elway for the better part of his adult life. And that's what made him kind of the perfect fit. But he was a big Trevor Siemian guy, and Elway drafted Paxton Lynch in the first round. I mean, those late-round picks are often head coaches' picks, guys that they really like on film, that they think they can find a spot for, and Trevor Siemian was certainly that. So I don't think that was the main factor at all, but I do think that it was probably a factor in helping push him across the finish line to say, okay, I've just had enough of being a head coach in the NFL and everything that goes with it.
Is there any indication that Gary Kubiak could stay in the Broncos organization, obviously not as the head coach, but have a different role?
Not right now, but that probably shouldn't be ruled out down the road. And I think his next role, because when he talked about being mad at John for calling him in Baltimore, he was pretty happy after the Houston Texans let him go. He's now the coordinator for the Ravens, and there was plenty of talk that he may not ever get back into becoming a head coach because he just didn't want to deal with everything that goes into being a head coach. He liked just coaching football. So it makes me think his next job is either going to be as a high school coach or a low-level junior college coach or a coordinator, whether that's in college or the pros. I just don't think he wants the stresses of being a head coach or a consultant. I mean, we saw Ron Moore, who was with Peyton all those years as the offensive coordinator in Indy. He's been a consultant for the last however many years. And I can see Gary taking a role like that, not necessarily here, although Kyle Shanahan ended up becoming the next head coach, then maybe Gary's back around a little bit more. But I think he's going to take a year off, which is what was recommended to him, as he said yesterday, by Texans owner Bob McNair. After he was let go in Houston, he didn't take him up on that or didn't listen to that advice. So I think he'll be at his ranch in Texas hanging out for a year, and then in a year you might see him somewhere else, but not as a head coach.